Okay. For those of you who do not know what Education USA is, we are an official network of the US State Department, and we work all around the world in more than 180 countries with about more than 400 advising centers all around the world. And we are the official source of information on US higher education. So our main goal is to provide students with accurate, comprehensive, unbiased information about studying in US universities, whether that's through a degree program where you get a bachelor's or master's or PhD or associate's degree, or through an exchange program. So we work with all accredited US higher education institutions. There are more than 4,000 of them, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail tomorrow. But Education USA works with all of them. So we do not promote certain universities in the US. What we do is we work with all accredited universities, and we help students find their best fit. So our job is to help you figure out what's going to be the best option for you, and we help you through that process. We understand that the process of applying to US universities is quite different than that in Ukraine or in other countries, if that's where you are. So we're here to help you with any step of the process, to answer all of your questions from the beginning to the end. We do not do any of the work for you or guarantee anything, but we are here as a resource for you, and to help you with any questions that you have. And because we are an official network of the State Department, everything that we do is free. All of our events, all of our advising sessions, lectures, resources, anything we can provide to you, we provide for free, okay? And we have our main advising center in Kyiv, on Esplanade 20. This is the metro station Palat Sportu. Of course, it's not operating right now, but once things return to normal, you're welcome to go to our office. We have a nice library there with lots of resources for preparing for standardized tests, searching for a university, etc. You're welcome to come hang out there and work through the admissions process. And that's also where we host our in-person appointments when they are happening. But right now, everything we're doing is online, of course, so you can sign up for a consultation with us through our website, and we'll talk about all of that later. But we are also partnered with the Window on America centers. You can see on the map there, that's all those little red markers, I guess. So the Window on America centers are in every oblast center in Ukraine, and they have resources related to higher education in the US. The advisors, the coordinators there have information about Education USA, and they can help you with any questions that you have as well. And finally, where you see the stars on the map, those are our Education USA ambassadors, one of whom is Christina, who's joining me today in Lviv over there. And all of our ambassadors are alumni of US government exchange programs, so Flex, Global UGrad, Open World. I don't know if I'm missing anybody, but they all have experience in the US, and they help us spread information about Education USA in the regions. So if you are in any of those regions where there's a star, you have an ambassador who conducts events in your regions and who can help you out with the process as well. All right, next slide, please. So this is our plan for these next 3 days. So we are meeting today, tomorrow, and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. We plan to work for about an hour and a half each evening. And it is, all of the content does build on each other, so on each day. So if you want to really get all of the information that you need about academic writing for US universities, I encourage you to attend all 3 sessions, okay? So this is what we're going to do today. Today we're going to talk about an overview of the writing process, basically for any type of writing you do, whether it's an admissions essay, an essay at university, any kind of writing that you do, recommendations for the process you should go through. Tomorrow, we'll talk about more about the system of US higher education and how to write essays and statements of purpose for admission to US universities, so in your application package. And then on Thursday, we will talk about, hopefully you are all successful with your application essays, you are accepted to a university, and what should you expect once you're actually in the classroom? What types of writing assignments will your professors give you, and what kinds of writing should you expect to do, how to do research, all that stuff, okay? all of the content for this workshop is applicable for students at any level of education. So whether you are thinking about getting a bachelor's degree in the US, a master's degree, or PhD degree, this content over these next 3 days should be useful to you. So we're prepared to talk about all those levels of education. All right. And with that, I'm going to, and I wanted to say that we do try to make this a little bit interactive, so you're not just sitting there and listening to us talk. So we'll ask you questions from time to time, and we encourage you, you'll see the chat box at the bottom of your screen there. Please type your questions into the chat box, type your comments into the chat box, and if you have any questions that require a longer explanation, you can raise your hand and we will unmute your mic, okay? So without further ado, I will hand it over to Christina.
Thank you, Nelly. So we are going to see the overview of the writing process today. And this is what me and Nelly are mainly going to talk about. If you have any questions, please let us know. Are we recording the session, by the way?
Yes, we are.
Awesome. Okay. So let's see the overview of the writing process. As you can see on the slide, it's quite complex. Depending on the type of your, so to say, personality or the way you perceive the information, the writing process will be different from you than it is for your friend or any other person in your class. You should adapt to your needs, and we will tell you the ways how to do that. You should also know that the writing process is far from being linear, which means that, of course, there are separate stages that you have to follow, but in most of the cases, you will go back and forth. And that's absolutely okay, because the more you travel, so to say, the better. The more you check and the more you revise, the more perfect, so to say, you get to be in your academic writing skills. And here are some of the basic stages that we'll cover today. They're brainstorming, pre-writing, writing, editing, and back to writing. Basically, on the picture, you can always also see that we have to collect information, develop our topic, then make our first draft. Then we go to see whether or not it matches our task, our instructions. Then we go to revise it, edit it, publish it, if we're publishing it anywhere, and then reflect again. There are many arrows, so please do not be confused. We'll tell you about every single stage today, and we'll start from brainstorming. I would like to ask whether or not any of you have ever used brainstorming in their writing process. So if you did, please put plus. If you did use a separate particular technique, please let us know about it. And Nelly, if our participants share their thoughts, please let me know if there is something interesting. So far,
Awesome.
It's pluses, right?
Lots of pluses.
Awesome.
If you have any particular techniques that you love, type them briefly into the chat box.
Because any single writing process demands brainstorming. Even though you might not write for your college, you're writing like a note or something, or a comment on Facebook, you still use brainstorming. But academic writing demands a few basic steps, few basic techniques. Are there any, Nelly?
I'm not seeing any comments about techniques that they use, but lots of pluses. It looks like almost everybody does brainstorming, which is a good sign.
Great. That's great. So we do not have to tell you what's that.
Christina added, I like to search some facts or interesting events to have some advantages in my essays. Aliona says free writing. Osman says, whatever comes to my mind, I write that down. Alina also does free writing. Natalia does mind mapping. So lots of great ideas here.
Oh, nice, nice. You guys covered like the half of the material we prepared for you. So the next question is, how would you use this staple? So this is a staple. Basically, we used to use it to exploit it just in one way. So we put the papers together with the help of this device. My question is, how would you use it? I'm giving you, I guess, a half of a minute, 30 seconds. So please put down your options, just 1, 2, 3 words. You may not put the whole sentence there. And Nelly, please read, what do we got on chat?
Mm-hmm. So what can you do with a paperclip?
Paperclip.
Nice. Irina says a hanger. Christina, to bring all papers together. Good. First draft, okay. What other creative ways can you use a paperclip? To close an open bag, to hang a Christmas decoration, to make a chain.
That's super typical for post-Soviet countries. My family did like that as well. Mm-hmm.
If we want to save something in social media, that's interesting. Sell it, and after a number of transactions, get a house. Nice. Connecting paper, cleaning between your teeth, opening locks, going fishing, a skrepka. Change a SIM card in your phone.
Oh yeah, that's true. I use that as well for them.
A hair tie, a bracelet to use in hair modeling, a bookmark to unlock a phone, to clean your nails, a toy for a cat.
I guess that's the most creative group we had so far, right?
Pushing the elevator button, I like that.
Oh, pushing the elevator button just for the hygiene, right?
Yeah.
Thank you guys for your creativity. Thank you for sharing your ideas. There are no correct options, just the more ideas you came up with, the better. And we see that you are quite good. So basically, I already asked you about the techniques of brainstorming. I'll tell you just in a few sentences what's that. Basically, that's the process of creation, whatever. And that's super cool because actually that's the part where we can express our ideas and the facts that we might not even be aware of or in our head. Even though some of them might not be really relevant or related to the main topic, we still put them somewhere on the paper or on the wall, whatever. There are thousands of techniques. And basically that's this creative process. It is some kind of beginning of the huge writing process. As I said, for every single person, there are separate rules for brainstorming, but basically you can go in whatever manner you prefer. So there are a few ground rules that could apply to any type of personality, so to say. As I said, some of the things that you come up with might not be relevant to your actual topic and the material you're working with. So you have to do more without paying attention to the quality. That's a very unique moment when quantity matters more than the quality. If you got much text and you feel like it's, so to say, stupid, if you feel like you wouldn't ever work with this, it's better not to get emotional, because actually this is what brainstorming is for. So do not think that that's your final draft. It's not even it's not even close to being your final draft. Do not criticize yourself much. And if there is a person brainstorming somewhere close to you, please do not interrupt the process and do not criticize them as well. If some of your ideas seem to be crazy, it's absolutely okay, because the more ideas you have, the better you can tailor your final idea. And one of the first techniques I would like to share is building on other ideas. So that's a very famous exercise stand-up comics use. Sometimes when they practice for their performance, they stay in front of each other and they say some kind of a statement, and another person says yes and they somehow transform initial idea and develop it, play with it, and so on. And basically they use a few concepts from their previous sentences, and this is how the story goes. We go on to the next brainstorming techniques. So the first one is free writing. There were some comments about people using free writing before. Would you please share what's that, free writing? Just in one sentence in the comment box, please. Are there any volunteers?
Let's see. So some of you mentioned that you do free writing. So what does that look like? Writing whatever comes to my mind without a structure, and usually with a limited time, writing all your ideas.
Absolutely. And basically time might not be your only limitation. So when I was learning Spanish, we used free writing to learn some of the unfamiliar words. And basically we had the exact amount of words that we had to use. For example, 50, not 49, not 51, just 50. So we could use whatever time we needed for writing exactly 50 words for that particular story. And as you said, you can use time limitations. So for instance, you have 4 or 5 minutes and you just go with whatever you have in your head. Sometimes when you feel like your brain is put on pause and you cannot go on and there is nothing in your mind, you can keep writing just one word. For example, nothing, 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 nothing. And believe me, when you actually spell nothing many times, your brain is like, okay, there's supposed to be something. And if your brain says the phrase, put it down. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with putting some crazy stuff and not the story, but the thoughts about the story. Then we go to clustering and mind map. Mind maps are super popular when it comes to brainstorming for different projects or business. And actually that's one of the greatest creative techniques. We're actually familiar with that because in Ukraine, you probably might know that there is that game for kids or for teenagers, for whatever. When I get bored, I play that, called associations. And basically mind map is something that associations do, but it's like in a very structured way. So basically you put one word in a circle in the center of the page, and then you put your associations with a word, and then you put the associations which are associated with the associations that you already have on your paper. And it goes on and on and on. And in the end, you have a big tree of different words, and you actually do not operate the sentences, but you operate the concepts and ideas. And that's a great thing to come up with some creative thoughts about the subject, and you can omit writing something typical using mind maps. Then we go for journaling. Probably all of you know that writing is a skill that doesn't just demand creativity, but daily practice. Practice makes perfect, and when we talk about writing skills, practice should actually happen on a daily basis. I know that journaling might be associated with something dramatic, emotional, and with expressing your thoughts and so on. So there is absolutely nothing wrong if you do not write in your notebook, how did your day go? But for example, you describe what is happening on the street, or what was the movie that you watched about. Or for example, you come up with a random story with the anecdote or with a joke. The more you write, the better. And if you do that regularly, that will for sure contribute to the final outcome. Doodling, even though you might think that doodling is not related to academic writing, it actually is. So again, it's not about developing your wording and structure of the sentence, but rather concept and ideas like mind maps. Basically, doodling might also seem like for the people who are really great in art, but even coloring some of the small details might inspire you, and you, in this very creative process, you might come up to some unique ideas that you didn't have before. And if you're still stuck, go back and read the prompt or step away from it for a while. Again, writing is a creative process, and there is nothing wrong if you feel like you're empty, your head doesn't work well, and so on. Just switch to a different activity, go back to it later, and review it. And then you will feel better. Then some of the new ideas will appear. So do not feel like you are stuck. Do not feel like that's the final point of your brainstorming process. We're slowly coming to the writer's block. There is a mem here. So the guy is just thinking that he's just invented a writer's block. It actually existed many years ago, and again, it's very natural to have it. Are there any ideas about dealing with writer's block, guys? Please share your experience, 1-2 sentences at max. Put your ideas in chat. As I said, you can put the process on pause, come back to it later. Some other things that you do when you feel that you're stuck, when you feel that there are no fresh ideas that you can use for your writing. What do you usually do?
Let's see. Someone said search for ideas on the internet, go back to free writing, take a break, stop, listen to some music to get some inspiration, go do some sports, switch to a different activity, call friends, listen to music, take a break, do research, write down a stream of thoughts, so go back to free writing again. Follow my intuition, I like that.
Yeah, actually, that might be very inspiring. Let's see. Okay. I'm just getting stuck with new sentences appearing on the screen. What I usually do, I just try using a different brainstorming techniques, but for every person who works in a different way. Thank you for sharing your experiences. So it happens to anyone, and the reasons, there are 3 basic reasons. Basically, the first one is being distracted, and that's the core one. I know that it's really hard to quit all of the applications working on your laptop and phone and kind of get rid of social media for an hour and a half. It's really hard to find a silent corner, especially now when we are forced to stay home with our families. But actually writing and brainstorming, it demands you to stay focused for a long time. So if you have a chance to hide your phone, it will work better. If you have a chance to tell your parents not to talk to you for an hour and a half, that might work as well. Again, if there are no ideas, as I said, you can try different brainstorming technique, or just choose another topic which might actually work, because talking about the essays, there are a few blocks, and you can actually divide the essay and brainstorm about different blocks at a different time. Again, there is another thing that I haven't ever experienced, but some of my friends did. So they're trying to come up with a draft by brainstorming, and at some point they say, well, I just don't like it, it won't turn out good. So they're kind of afraid that their draft is not perfect, but draft is supposed not to be perfect. So you may edit it like as much time as you would like to. Please do not make a mistake, and do not turn on your perfectionism in here. That's not the place. Again, as you say, if you have an opportunity to take a break, go for a walk, sleep, play, do anything else, and then come back, that's a great idea as well. Change your environment. Well, right now that seems unrealistic, but still, during our normal life regime, so to say, we can go from library, to the park, on the street, somewhere in the yard, playing with our dog or cat might actually switch our brain into different regime. And right, yeah, as I said, just writing is a great brainstorming technique, and it's very simple. So here is the homework, and I guess that Nelly might want to explain it a little bit more, right?
Yeah, so we wanted to give you some homework to actually help you practice this in a way that's relevant for our purposes. So what we want you to do is, after this session, we're not gonna, give you a grade or require this or anything, but after this session today, brainstorm on one of the prompts that I will send you. And then tomorrow at the beginning of our session, we'll go over what you came up with, and you'll be able to get advice from an Education USA advisor, who is me, about how you could move forward with this essay or develop your ideas even further. So there may be some of you, some of our participants who are interested in bachelor's degrees, and some of our participants who are interested in master's or PhD degrees. And we will go into detail tomorrow about the difference between those and how those essays would be different. So that's okay. You don't have to understand all that for this brainstorming activity. So I'm going to send the link in the chat for the prompts you should look at if you are interested in bachelor's degrees. And I will send a little description of what you should write about for a statement of purpose for master's or PhD degrees. So think about what level of education you're interested in, and then choose one of those prompts to brainstorm about, okay? And if you're not sure you want to get a degree in the US, you're just here to learn about academic writing, I would recommend that you brainstorm about one of the Common App prompts, because those are rather general. So then brainstorm about that using one of the discussed methods or a different one. And then send your notes from your brainstorm either in written form if you like to type them up on your computer, or in picture format if you're more of a visual brainstormer. You do some doodling, some mind mapping. Just send a photo of it to me to educationusa.org before tomorrow's session, and we will discuss it tomorrow and give feedback to anyone who sends it to me and wants feedback. So I'm going to put those into the chat box right now, so you can have them. So here are the Common App prompts if you are interested in a bachelor's degree. They are general enough so that, like I said, even if you don't know what degree you want to pursue, these are still good kind of open-ended prompts. And if you are interested in pursuing a master's or PhD degree, here is the prompt that I recommend you respond to. Like I said, obviously you don't know yet what those essays should look like, but we'll talk about that tomorrow. This is just the brainstorming part, okay? All right.
Shall we move forward?
Let's move forward.
Okay, so we got to the outlining section.
Okay. So once you have done some brainstorming and you're ready to sit down and write, there's really, here, hold on, let me turn my camera so y'all can see me. There's really an intermediate step. It's usually called pre-writing, somewhere between brainstorming and writing. And what I would recommend is making an outline. So I can say from my personal experience that in high school and even well into college, I would never really plan my writing. I would do a couple minutes of brainstorming, and then I would sit down at my computer or my notebook and just start writing my essay from the first sentence. And that works for some people, and you can kind of get away with that to a certain level of academic writing, but I can tell you that your life will get so much better, so much easier if you start outlining. So let's talk about what outlining is if you have never encountered that before. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what is an outline if you've never done one before? Basically, it's a roadmap for your writing. So it's a plan that you make for yourself before you actually sit down and start writing that introductory paragraph to help you establish a structure ahead of time. And this is super helpful because it will prevent you from getting lost in your writing. Especially when you are writing an argumentative paper or an analytical paper that's very complex and requires a lot of logic. Well, all of your papers should have a logic, but is especially dependent on building a logical argument. If you just sit down and start writing, you kind of get lost in the weeds and might sort of lose track of what your argument is or what your thesis is. This can also be helpful on getting clear feedback on your writing sort of before you go too far, right? So you could send a friend or a peer or a colleague or a professor an outline to say, how does this plan look? Does it make sense? Before you actually jump in and start writing. Because if you jump in and start writing, you might write an entire paper until you get to the end and realize the structure doesn't make sense or my ideas are not clear, okay? And this can also be helpful if you need to present the information later. So if we're speaking about assignments that you will write in college, it can be really helpful because let's say you have to write a paper and then you have to give a 10-minute presentation on it in class, or even defend a thesis for a master's or a PhD program. You can go back to your outline that you've already created and use that as notes to present your paper, right? Because hopefully you all know that you should never, ever, ever just read a paper when you're presenting it. You should have short, brief notes in front of you. And if you have an outline already created, half the work is done for you. So when we're speaking about academic writing, especially once you are already in a US college or a university, professors sometimes may even require an outline. They may say, you know, as a graded assignment, they may say, please show me your outline and we will discuss it before you start writing, and they will give you a grade on your outline. They may not. A lot of professors just sort of trust you to have your own writing process and do your own thing. And they may not require an outline, but I would say regardless, it is a good practice to get into. Honestly, you save a lot of time when you outline ahead of time because you have this plan that you can refer to instead of, like I said, getting lost, spending time trying to go back and figure out your own logic and your own structure. And I will say that this is helpful for any kind of writing you're doing. This is not necessarily just for, you know, strictly for academic writing, you know, argumentative papers or anything like that. This can be helpful for writing your admissions essays as well, or your statement of purpose, or even for creative writing. If you're writing a novel or, you know, something like that, or a short story. So this is applicable for any kind of writing, not just research-based assignments, but any kind of writing you may do. It's really helpful to make a plan for yourself ahead of time. Next, please. So when you have to make an outline or decide to make an outline, how do you start? So the first thing to do would be to determine the purpose and the audience for your assignment. Right, for an admissions essay or a statement of purpose, your audience is the admissions committee. For most academic writing assignments, your audience will be your professor, but is it more of a scholarly audience? Is it more of a wider, I don't know, wider audience? Are you trying to write something that is understandable by a wider group of people? So it depends. So identify that first, and we will talk more about that on Thursday. And then develop your working thesis, which Christina will talk about a little bit more later. But it's important to know that, and you might have experience with this, that when you're writing a thesis for an academic paper, you know, you'll come up with your working thesis when you start writing your paper, and then that may develop. Once you actually look and see what you've written, you might go back and edit your thesis a little bit to reflect your argument better. But your outline should always start from a working thesis, so you at least know, you know, what direction you're going in. And then brainstorm, we've already talked about that. So once you've brainstormed, look at the ideas that you have, organize them, group them together, look for connections or relationships, order your ideas, figure out what structure you want to have for your argument and how you want to present the information, and then arrange the material from, you know, you start with general, you go to specific, or from more abstract ideas to then concrete examples. And then label your outline. So you create different headings to help make your roadmap clear to yourself and to your reader if someone else is going to be looking at it for you. Next, please. So here's a sample outline structure. I will also show you in just a moment some examples from my own academic history, so you can see sort of what real outlines looked like that I had to turn in for university assignments. But you'll start with your introduction, right? And the labels for these points, you see here we have a large A, we have capital letters right at the outside, and then inside small letters, and then we go down to, you know, point 1, 2 with Roman numerals. And there are different ways to label an outline depending on, you know, what sort of labels you want to use. If you want to use capital letters, Roman numerals, usually it's up to you. But anyway, there are different ways to do it. But the nice thing is that most word processors like Microsoft Word or even Google Docs online, sorry, my cat is making noises, understand an outline structure, and they will just automatically format it and label it for you. And you can change that within Microsoft Word. But anyway, you see here, you've got your introduction, and your outline should always include your thesis statement as a point in your introduction. So again, you can refer back to that. It seems that this is more of a historical paper that requires historical background. So you've got a background paragraph or a few paragraphs providing the overview. So you're giving your reader context for the information that you're going to present. Then you've got sections for each of your major points. You've got major point 1 here at letter C, and then minor points that are related to that point, and then evidence. So as you all know, when you're writing an argumentative or analytical paper, you always need to have evidence to back up what you are arguing or the points that you're making. And it's really important. You can see in the bottom left there, excuse me, it says name your sources in your outline. This will also save you so much time at the end or when you're writing your paper, right? When you're going through the research phase and pulling evidence from sources, again, we'll talk more about that on Thursday, about how to evaluate sources. But when you put that in your outline, it's going to save you so much time and energy later. So you don't have to go back through, you know, if you're researching a paper and you have consulted 30 books and articles, it's going to save you so much time if you don't have to go back through all of your sources and try to figure out, oh my gosh, where did I wrote this down in my outline, but I do not remember where I got it from. I did that a couple times in college and it was very stressful. So save yourself some time, name those sources right away in your outline so you know exactly where to look later when you're actually writing everything down. And again, here we see at point E, you can have as many major points as you need depending on the length of the paper with the same structure. And then in your conclusion, restate your thesis. In this case, talk about next steps in literature and next steps in research and different literature conversations or limitations on the research. So of course, this will look different for you know, a research paper in organic chemistry versus a history class about the Soviet Union versus a sociology class, but this is the basic structure that you can use to give you an idea of what that actually looks like. Next slide. Okay, before I do that, can you go back, Christina? And actually, I want to show a few examples, like I mentioned. So if you could actually stop sharing your screen and I will share mine to show this. So my examples are not perfect. I'm not like the absolute all-knowing expert on outlines, but I just want to show you real things that I turned in for classes, like I mentioned. So this one, you all get to see my Hamilton background. This was one that I do not think I had to turn in for an assignment, but it was a roadmap that I made for myself. And this was for a history class on Latin America, if it will load. Here we go. So you can see there, I'll make it a little bit bigger. You can see there that I didn't have a whole lot of details about my intro because I just didn't want to outline that, but I did end with my thesis. And you can see that I was comparing revolutions in different countries in Latin America. So we've got 3 countries here, Guatemala, Chile, and Cuba. And then they have, you know, parallel structures within that. So in Guatemala, we have the rise of socialism and the fall of socialism. In Chile, we have the rise of Allende, the socialist leader, and the fall of Allende, right? Cuba, we have the rise of socialism, and then armed revolution, right? So we have parallel structures. So we see very clearly we have a structure where we take each country case by case and then talk about the rise and fall of socialism in those countries with specific quotes that I wanted to use from the sources that I had referenced and evidence that I was going to use throughout, okay? And then have my conclusion. Again, there aren't details here. Ideally, you would have more details in your conclusion, but this was just a roadmap for myself. Another paper that I wrote, this I believe I did have to turn in for a grade, and this was for a paper where I had to write, actually recommend a policy. And so it looked a little bit different in that we provided an executive summary about the problem or about the issue, again, provided an overview with the historical context, talked about the current policy, then made a policy recommendation with details again, and then the conclusion takes the form of the implementation. How would you actually implement this policy? And then I have the sources that I would use here, okay? So it can look a little bit different depending on the class, but this is, you know, what a pretty basic outline would look like. You'll notice these are only a page or a page and a half. Of course, if you're writing a 30-page paper or a 70-page dissertation, you're going to have a lot more information. But I just want to show you concrete examples of what this could actually look like in a college class, okay? All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Christina, you can go back to the presentation. Fantastic, thank you. Next, please. And next again, awesome. So that's outlining before you start writing, but there's also something called reverse outlining, which you can use as an editing technique after you have finished writing, after you actually have something, have a product, first draft. And Christina will talk more about editing later. But once you have actually finished a draft of your essay, you can look at what you have actually written. You can put your original, you should put your original outline aside. So sort of put those ideas aside of what you plan to write and only look at what you have actually ended up writing. And there are different ways to do this, but an easy way is to have your paper in front of you, print it out, or take notes on your computer if you can do that. And in the left-hand margin, so on the left side of the paper next to each paragraph, write down the main topic of each paragraph. So try to condense this down to just 5 or 10 words. If you can't simplify it down to 5 or 10 words, usually that means that your idea is not clear enough, which is a good hint to you as well. So on the left-hand side, write down the main topic for each paragraph that you have actually ended up writing about. And on the right-hand side of the paper, write down a few words, again, 5 to 10 words about how this topic advances your overall argument, how this topic relates to your thesis. And then, you know, those notes might be enough for you to see, okay, is this organization clear? Is the logic clear? Are my ideas in each paragraph clear and specific enough? And does it contribute to my thesis? Those notes might be enough to tell you that. Or you might actually go and create a reverse outline again and actually, you know, type up in an outline structure what you've actually written, if that helps you clarify your ideas. But it will help you see, again, is the organization logical? Is the structure clear? Are the main ideas clear? Again, this is not something that's required to do. It might just help you to do the process in reverse and see, okay, now that I see what I've actually written, does it make sense? And how does it compare to what I plan to write, which could help you, again, clarify your thesis. All right, I think that's everything on outlining. So Christina, I'm gonna hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you. So we will talk about writing strong paragraphs. Actually, the structure might be a little bit different from the structure that we learned at Ukrainian school, but actually when you know 2 ways of coming up with strong paragraphs, both from American way and Ukrainian perspective, your paragraph will be the stronger. So let's see. What is the main principle? So 1 point per paragraph and 1 stress-worthy thing per sentence. That's the golden rule of the strong paragraph, because sometimes when we brainstorm and for example, we are doing the free writing, we do not realize that that's brainstorming process. And we think that this flow might be a great way to write an essay, but actually essay is way more structured text than your free writing text is. So it's better to stress out one important thing in your sentence and one important concept in your paragraph. Let's see how we can do that. So typical paragraph, it includes at least 5 sentences. It shouldn't be too long. In some of the universities and colleges, they're required to be not like longer than 6 sentences or 6 lines, but actually every single instruction that you meet, it's different. So make sure that you find out the instructions by a particular educational institution. Today we're talking about the standard paragraph, which includes a topic sentence and conclusion sentence in the end. And then in the middle, we have 3 supporting sentences. So basically a topic sentence is something that is opening the paragraph up and preparing the reader to the things that he or she will be reading about. Supporting sentences are the ones with the evidence. So here you're welcomed to include some facts, dates, history, characters, and so on and so forth, because they usually recommend to avoid those in the topic and conclusion sentences. So those should be general if your word count allows you to do so. Again, the principle is very simple, and you actually could print that out and put that somewhere on your wall. Tell them what you're gonna say it, and tell them what you said, because at some point you have to develop your idea. The way you perceive it might not be the way that the other person does, especially if that's admission committee from a different country. They might not be familiar with the way you think and the way you express yourself. So it's better to make things very clear and repeat them 3 times at least with a different wording and in a different manner. So here is a very detailed structure of almost any paragraph. Again, we are talking about the paragraphs which are located somewhere in the center of your text, somewhere in the middle of your text. We're not talking about introduction and conclusion. They might be very similar, but they have very specific details, which we'll talk about a little later. So again, we'll start with a thesis statement. So again, that's something which is connecting your reader to the things they are about to read. The topic sentence, then we go to introduction, evidence, explanation, and conclusion. So for example, there is a historic event you're talking about. In Ukraine, at Ukrainian school, at Ukrainian universities, I was actually taught to put that in the very beginning of the paragraph, so that the teacher or any other student who is reading that knows what the paragraph is about. Here, when we are talking about American requirements, it's better to put it somewhere in the middle, so I'm not surprised with a date, with a fact, and I'm not reading explanation right after I'm given the fact, but rather I'm prepared that this fact will appear and that the fact appears, and I read the brief analysis of that event or description of a character and so on. Every single time you're working with concrete data, it's better to explain that, because again, at some educational institutions here in Ukraine, we are required to show our solid knowledge about the facts. And in most of the American institutions, what you will face is the issue of you analyzing the events. For example, Nelly was showing you the information about Cuba, the essay about revolutions, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm sure that her essay included lots of analysis, not just the dates and the names. That's super important. And basically those are the principles you can follow to make a perfect paragraph. We are going to something bigger called a strong paper, which has a very similar structure, but it covers the entire text as well. So the first one is introduction paragraph or introduction part. Don't be scared if your essay requirements instructions, they include something like introduction section, because section might actually sometimes include a few paragraphs if your paper is long enough. But if we're talking about classic one, it's just one paragraph of introduction. It includes a thesis statement. We'll talk about that just in a second. Then 3 supporting paragraphs. In Ukrainian essays, we usually call them arguments, right? Argument 1, 2, and 3. And then we go to conclusion paragraph, which basically is very similar to introduction paragraph, but it's put in different words. Again, the principle here is very similar to the one that we already know from building a strong paragraph. Tell them what you're going to say it, and tell them what you said. No need to explain, I guess. So that's something really similar that we saw a slide before. Introduction, including a thesis statement, 3 points, conclusion. Again, that's something that refers to 5-paragraph essay that can be 4, 5, 6 points or just 2 points, but we're talking about the classic one. And right now I would like to show you something called a thesis statement. So before coming to American school, I've never heard about it. And in Ukrainian schools, I never read about it actually. So introduction paragraph was something very abstract, was something really emotional, and it was supposed to have a hook. So even though I was writing an academic essay in Ukraine, I wanted to make my reader interested in what I'm writing, and that's why the only thing that I knew about introduction was that hook. When we're talking about American essays, there is something interesting you might actually start using in your Ukrainian papers as well, and it's called thesis statement. Basically, that's the last sentence of your first paragraph. Again, so you have the introduction paragraph and the last sentence of your introduction paragraph. It can be called topic, sentence, or thesis statement. For instance, there is a topic, should homework be banned? And the thesis statement to cover this topic is homework should be banned because it stifles students' creativity, takes too much time, and does not actually help students learn. I want to stress out that this sentence actually has 3 arguments about the creativity, about timing, and doesn't actually help students learn. So basically, if we imagine the whole paper, which we do not have here, we can already say that the author is against homework, and he or she does agree that the homework should be banned. And there are 3 reasons listed in the sentence. Actually, when I was learning the theory about thesis statements, I was told that the thesis statement is a very brief description of your essay. So it's some kind of a brief version. If I want to find out what's the essay is about and what are the main arguments, I should go to the thesis statement and see the structure. Here is another well, it's not the paragraph, it's the thesis statement. You can read it by yourself. Again, it's not related to homeworks or something, but we've got some particular message here, and we can actually develop the entire essay from this statement. But the interesting thing is that I recommend writing thesis statement in the very end of your writing process. So basically, after you listed all of the arguments, all of the points, you've covered all of the evidence, all of the facts that you wanted that are relevant to your paper. You see how many of them are in your paper, and you just put them in a one short sentence. Some experts say that it shouldn't be more than 17 words, but I doubt it, because, for example, the second part that you see on the screen cannot be, shortened to 17 words, so do not stick to that myth. Many educational institutions have their particular interpretation of academic writing, so some of them might actually recommend you stick to a particular number of words in that sentence. Here are a few other features that topic sentence might include. So again, it answers the core questions. I see the topic of the essay, I go to the thesis statement, and I completely understand the position of the writer. It presents a clear argument, or at least a brief argument. But again, I understand what is the perspective of the person who was writing it. Contains only one full sentence. Even though we might think that it's impossible to shorten our essay to just one sentence, it actually is. The more you practice, the better you score, and you shouldn't ever divide your thesis statement into two parts. That's the rule, and it does demand you practicing a little more. What is interesting about thesis statements, sometimes we want to include many names and many facts, many dates, and so on, some quotes even sometimes, but actually it doesn't work like that. So again, thesis statement is not a hook. You don't want to make your reader interested. You kind of explain what your ideas are like, and therefore please do not use any concrete information, but just explain it in very easy language, or not easy language. It actually depends on your academic level. Closes the introduction. Again, thesis statement is the last sentence that the introduction paragraph includes. And here, from the right side of the slide, you may actually see two approximate structures of the thesis statement that you can use. Most of them will start with the linking words. For example, the first one, see, there is therefore or however, then we have the main claim, because brief argument. If we go back, for example, these two statements do not have any linking words, but using them, you kind of link your whole sentence to the previous sentences that you have in the paragraph, so do not be scared of using them. And another structure that you may use is although, opposite claim, then make claim, because, and brief arguments. Actually, practicing writing the thesis statements might be a time-consuming activity, and if you have some time, you might actually try doing so. My way of practicing was choosing a random topic. For example, why Gossip Girl is like the worst teenage series I've ever watched. And then I just came up with a brief argument, and I was trying to put that in a very sophisticated language so it looks like a thesis statement. Or for example, why Ukrainian economic growth is under a threat in 2021, for instance. And you just write a thesis statement even though you do not have the whole essay. It will give you an overview of the writing process, of this little stage of the writing process, and you actually might not get stuck in future when you have limited time on writing academic paper. For example, you're having a test or a writing section on IELTS or something, and you have to come up with a thesis statement like in a few minutes. So you already know how to do that in a correct manner, and there are no issues with that. Nelly, do you want to add something?
Well, we have a question in the chat box that I want to ask before we move on to editing. Christina asks, should the thesis statement include academic words such as however, for instance, essentially, etc.?
Oh, okay. Yes. I wouldn't call those academic words. I would call those linking words. And yes, absolutely. as you can see from the slide, two of the structures that I'm showing to you here, they include the linking words that you mentioned. So the first one includes therefore, however, and the second one includes although, because. They actually show how you connect your arguments, how you connect your ideas. So yes, do not be afraid of using those in the thesis statement. Thank you for your question. Mm-hmm. Anything else before we move forward?
She follows up and asks, do they add points? So Christina in the chat box, you specifically mentioned for instance, and I think to reiterate what Christina, our speaker, said, you're not including any evidence or examples in your thesis statement. That's what you're going to develop in the body of your essay. Your thesis statement is only the most simple form of the argument that you're going to make, but you do not give evidence or provide those claims in your thesis statement. That's what you do in the body of your essay. But you can use however. So, you know, especially if you're using a paper that, or if you're writing a paper that contradicts what somebody else has said on the topic. So you could say, you know, although most historians claim, that the revolution in Cuba was successful, however, it was unsuccessful because of this. And then in your paper, you would give evidence for that. So I hope that clarifies a little bit. So you're not getting into any sort of nitty-gritty details in your thesis statement. It is just the most basic form of your argument. And even if you're not right, you know, I think you can have a thesis statement in all kinds of writing, even if it's not, you know, a very sophisticated research paper that you're writing at university. Even your admissions essays or statements of purpose will have a thesis statement in some way. It may not be as explicit as the last sentence of your paragraph, of your first paragraph, but still you have an argument you're trying to make, right? Like your argument, again, you won't say this directly, but your argument is, I should be admitted to this university because of these 3 reasons, because of my unique Ukrainian perspective, the research I've done at university, and my career ambitions or whatever. So in any kind of writing, whether it's direct or not, you will have a thesis statement. One more follow-up question. Can we develop, maybe you mean deliver? Can the thesis statement be somewhere else other than the first paragraph?
Well, the answer is no, because it's a part of the general structure. If you deliver thesis statement somewhere in the middle of your essay, that will be considered as a mistake, and it will look like, for example, you put the introduction somewhere in the middle. So it just doesn't make sense if you do that. So please try to avoid that. One more thing that I wanted to add to what Christina said is that when I was studying to write my IELTS essay, my mom actually gave me a great table of the linking words. And I probably didn't appreciate the content as much as I did the division of the linking words into separate categories. What I mean, for example, there are the linking words that would be appropriate for beginning your paragraph. There are the linking words which show you, which are better when you demonstrate cause and effect. There are linking words that are the best for your conclusion paragraph. So you can actually Google those, and there are many, many types of division. And if you doubt whether or not should I use, for instance, in my thesis statement, you may actually find some alternatives which will suit better. Any other questions?
Nope, I'm not seeing any.
Okay.
So I think we can move forward.
Awesome. Self-editing. So here's the sentence, and I will ask you guys to read it a couple times and tell us how would you correct it in a nice way. Take a minute or 30 seconds is even better, and just write whatever mistake you see here. How would you like to probably shorten it or make it look more attractive? We're not sticking to academic writing norms. We're sticking to common sense. So what would you as a reader fix in the sentence? Please put your answers in the chat box.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any ideas?
Mm-hmm. We've got a couple. Good. Keep sending in your ideas and we will address them. Okay. Okay, someone says change the key to the car to car keys instead. Add commas or separate the sentence into two. There's no punctuation, which makes it confusing. Split into several sentences. Omit and I guess after car in the second line. Someone suggested head of the department to make it shorter. Anastasia recommended the car was locked, so she asked for a person who had a key. Good. Erica needed car keys, so she asked for the contacts of person in charge of the keys. So lots of good ideas here.
Oh, well, then you guys understand what self-editing is, and you probably understand that every single sentence written should be reviewed. One more thing before we move forward. I'm not sure whether or not we are talking about American punctuation here, Nelly. Are we?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It might look hard, but actually it's absolutely not complicated. It's even easier than Ukrainian one. There are a few things that you should learn by heart, and then it will go like reading such words as through, throw, and so on. You just have to learn it by heart once and then use it for the rest of your life. So do not worry about the punctuation here. Okay, so in order to make your self-editing process more effective, it's better to read the sentences and paragraphs and the entire text out loud. Even though it might look weird, but actually that helps because you are not concentrated on the spelling issues rather than the way it sounds and the way your words are put, their order. There is one more recommendation. We should see our level of English and we should know what mistakes we make constantly. Again, for Ukrainian students, there are a few typical concerns that we may not actually avoid. Another thing that we have to stress out is underuse of intelligent words. I would like to make a pause here. Actually, myself, I was trying to use as many sophisticated words as I could in all of my essays. But the thing is that the person who is reading the essay, they probably would like to read something which is easy to read. And the thing is that they actually do not stress out my ability to look for the unknown words in thesaurus, because if those words do not match the sense of the essay, that means that I'm not that good in English, and my only reason behind using those words was showing off, And we certainly don't want you guys to be in such a situation. So when you are looking for the synonyms, it's better to look for the whole sentences where the particular word will be used in some kind of a context. So you see whether or not this kind of context will match your own text. And then you can actually put the word in your own paragraph or sentence. The thing is that English language is not that complicated, but the thing is that many of the words have various shadows, and some of the words might be used as nouns and as verbs and as adjectives at the same time. So do not be afraid of making your essay sound too simple. Again, Nelly will later explain how to avoid some of the words like very or so, but there are certainly some alternatives which are more common than some of the words that you find in thesaurus. And under use of intelligent words means that your essay looks too simple, but most of the students try to work their writing skills out, and we do not face that problem that much, but still try to balance this thing. Okay, so here we have the sentence, I always read books in the evening. And you may see how ridiculous the second sentence look. So it actually is the same as the first one, except for most of the phrases, most of the words are replaced with some sophisticated constructions, which actually tend to make this sentence very complicated, hard to read, and of course no one says like that. So it's better to stick to the first version if it is the way you actually pronounce the sentence in your life. Okay, so right now we came to the section of the common mistakes made by Ukrainians. We all know that Ukrainian language and English language, they're different. And of course, some of the grammar moments cannot be thoroughly learned at school. And among some of the most common mistakes we make when we're writing essays, there are the following points. Articles, because we just do not have those, so we cannot actually see the alternative perspective of that. Articles is the first topic in every grammar book, so just spend an hour and a half, try to learn when we should use those. But again, there are many tools you might use to see whether or not the article is in the right way. One of them is Grammarly, which is absolutely free. You probably have seen their ad somewhere on YouTube because they advertise their service in many countries. Basically, that's the product that was developed by our Ukrainian developers somewhere in Silicon Valley. What they did is coming up with a website which actually highlights every single time you make a mistake in spelling, grammar, and punctuation. There is the paid version of it, but the thing is that it doesn't correct the basic, well, it does correct the basic moments, but it also does correct some of the meanings that you might imply in a wrong way. And basically the basic version, which is absolutely free, may correct your articles. And if you know that that's the issue that you face a lot, try to fix your articles before you hand in your paper. Using the right tense. Again, Ukrainian language has 3 basic tenses, and dealing with 12 verb tenses and with passive and active voice might be challenging. Actually, there is a great table on the right side of the slide. When I am confused with the verb tenses I should use, I actually go back to this table, but I have my own one. And in every single box, I have the example of the sentence. So for example, I did my homework. It's a great thing because I see that it looks like the sentence I'm about to use here in my essay, and it actually does match. So I have to use past simple. So most of the tables like that you find on the internet, they include the grammatical explanation of the tense, and you actually need that for learning but do not need that for practice. So make sure that you have the actual sentences written out in every single box so you can see what are the analogs. Then we go to general verb subject agreement, which is again different in Ukrainian, and that's just the thing that you have to learn. Again, this topic is not that hard, and you can spend 1 hour, 1 hour and a half to learning it. And again, the word order, well, I like to compare Ukrainian language to a flow, and English language, and like most of the European languages, is rather structural to me. And again, it's better to use a classic structure than trying to show off with the word order, so to say, templates that you're not quite familiar with. So just use підмет and then присудок and then everything else, better than experimenting with the sentence format.
Can you, before we move on to pure editing, can you say again the website that you recommended for checking spelling, articles, and all that stuff?
Yes, it goes like Grammarly, GRAMMARLY.com.
Thank you.
You can register there via your Facebook or Google account, and it actually saves all of the papers that you're putting there. And if I'm not mistaken, there is the plug for Google Chrome. And when you add that, every single time you type something, for example, you're writing an email or simply writing a message somewhere on Facebook, this Grammarly extension will highlight the words that you wrote in a wrong way. This is what I usually do when I'm sending my emails to Nelly because I'm embarrassed. So that's a great thing, and it's free. I've been using it for 3 years, and I've been using both free version of the one for commercial usage, and I enjoyed the free one as much as I did with a commercial one.
Someone also asked if there's an app, and it looks like there is in the App Store. It's like a keyboard add-on for your phone.
Yeah, I'm not actually using one, but if you find one, please share. Because it got so popular, it got many competitors, and those guys are trying to, you know, progress more. So I'm sure there is an app, but it just has a different name. And one more thing that I wanted to tell you is the amazing osdic.com website. Nelly, would you please put that in the chat as well?
Sure.
So that's the tool that I learned about in my university. I was studying linguistics, and my English teacher told my group that Ukrainians have an issue with combining words because we have something called відмінки, and we have like 7 of those. English language has none, or at least 3. For example, I, me, and myself, and that's really hard for us to use prepositions and so on. So basically, OSDIC is a part of the Oxford Dictionary company, and what it has, it's very easy to use. So basically, if you have a minute today, please try it. You just go on the website, type any word, for example, game, and you have the number, like all of the types of words you can use with the word game or any other word. For example, to play with someone, to play a game, not play in a game, like we would say in Ukrainian. Then we would have many adjectives that would be connected to the game. For example, fun game or dead game, and so on and so forth. So if you're not sure how to use the word, just go to OSDIC and you will have some ideas. It will give you some clue of how it actually is supposed to look in a sentence. Okay, shall we go to peer editing, Nelly?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So peer editing is something that we do not usually practice in Ukraine, but in America, it's a great thing. It's another activity that you can share with your classmates, peers. So peer editing is a process when you give your text to someone else to read, and instead you're reading that person's essay. Basically, you help the author understand the writing from the perspective of a reader. You may read it out loud and notice some of the mistakes that the author hasn't noticed so far. You share what is going well and what needs work. So basically, you have to share the positive and the negative sides that you have seen by reading the text and helping author understand how the piece of writing can become even stronger. Basically, in Ukraine, it would look like we're criticizing one's work, but from the American point of view, you're kind of encouraging the author to do even a better job, and that's super important. We try to avoid criticism in its classical vision, so we're trying to improve the paper with our suggestions how to make it look better. And here's another slide which I really like about the constructive criticism. Sometimes we might have issue with that, and I'm not the exception. I'm actually reading a book how to avoid criticizing others right now. So you might use the tips on this slide to give the constructive criticism to your peers. If you have something that you do not like about the paper, it's better not to say, I do not like it this way, but it's better to say, I like this and that. And this paragraph, I would improve it and put it in this way. So make a suggestion, because when you criticize someone, you have to give some specific ideas how to improve that piece of text. There is a very, very old school technique called feedback sandwich. So we have 2 pieces of bread and then a hamburger. And by 2 pieces of bread, we mean positive feedback. And by hamburger, we go for some kind of a negative feedback or the things that we would improve. For instance, I really like your outline. I would like to make the introduction stronger, but I really enjoy the conclusion. And basically, you may use the sandwich structure in a sentence, in a paragraph, or even deliver a speech about someone's essay using this technique. Focus on the writing, not the person. At some point, when we do the peer editing, we may not abstragate ourselves from the person, and we read it through the perspective of the author writing it. Of course, it happens like that for natural reasons. At the same time, we're trying to save our time and emotions on criticizing, and we really want other people to succeed in their writing as well as we want to receive constructive criticism as well. So it's better to avoid telling something really personal to people when you're reading their essays. It's better to be very old critic, so to say. Be specific. The less emotions you include to your feedback, the better your outcome will be, and be actionable. So make some suggestions how people can fix the problem if the problem exists. Some other recommendations here: take a breath and try to remove yourself, not to take it personally. Again, that's a very common problem for us Ukrainians because we're super emotional and we're very empathetic, and sometimes that plays a very bad joke with us. So just try to be a teacher. You know, in the United States, some of the classes, they have, so to say, a blank paper, and when you write down your name, the teacher just doesn't see that because they're checking the bottom part of the paper. And the same thing happens during the flex testing. The same thing happens during ZNO. So when people are trying to read our ZNO papers, they do not know us. They do not know who is Ivan Petrovich. And this is why they do not have any personal attitude towards the person. So just try to be a nice teacher who is not evaluating someone in a personal way. Remember their intention. It means that you should wear the shoes of the person who is the author and see whether or not you understand why he or she used this kind of arguments, not the other ones. So that's about empathy again. Is the criticism helpful? At the end of the day, you can take the advice or not. So if, for example, the person is giving you the criticism and you're not satisfied with that, it's absolutely your choice whether or not you're paying attention to those recommendations or not. Remember, it's just one opinion. Again, peer editing implies people of the very similar background, usually students or classmates, editing each other's papers. Well, not even editing, but suggesting about the improvements. And there are always more people who can give you their opinion. And if you trust those people, they will give you more constructive feedback. So if it's the person who doesn't like you or you had a conflict before, of course, there always will be something personal. But if you have, for example, a teacher or a person with more experience, education USA ambassador or advisor, they might be better help than your angry classmate. Okay, and here is the brief description of the peer editing process. So you gather essay once without corrugation. Again, it's our very Ukrainian habit to start reading the essay and start helping right away. For example, I just read the introduction and I'm like, okay, so here are the things that I would like to change about the introduction. At the same time, you might take some notes if you cannot hold your, opinion. But I would recommend to read you the whole piece and get the opinion about the whole essay, not just the part of it. You have to see the big picture instead of going into details from the beginning. And at the same time, you're giving another person to read your essay, so you do not interrupt the reading process, and that's great. Read again and answer some basic questions about the structure. Make some suggestions to improve. Again, from the big picture, we go to the smaller picture. And the smaller picture is the structure. Is the order of the paragraphs correct? What things we can improve? What things can we suggest? Then we read again, and then we go into details. Grammar, spelling, punctuation mistakes. And again, we should not correct them, but tell the person about them. If we are using some kind of highlighter, that might be helpful as well. Point out 2 things the author did well and 2 things the author can improve. And again, it's not about the positive and negative feedback. Do not perceive it as black or white, but perceive it as the process of assistance. So you are helping out the person with the things that they might improve about their paper. And please do not forget to stress out what things went well and what things you can take for as an example, because you should always encourage the person who worked hard. I guess you would like to have the same attitude towards you in the end. And we finished on time, finally. Are there any questions or comments about this section? Please let us know via Q&A box or chat box, and Nelly or I will be glad to answer those.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Christina. So yeah, this is the end of our content for the day. So we'll just take these last few minutes to let you ask any last minute questions. There was one more in the chat box that I wanted to address, but I just wanted to add one more thing about peer editing and the importance of asking someone that you trust. Like, someone may be your best friend, but that doesn't mean that you should ask them for feedback. Like, even if they're, you love them a lot. I mean, I love my sister, but she studied art, and so I didn't ask her for feedback on my history papers about Latin America, right? So that's important. No matter how much you like someone, make sure that you have seen their quality of writing, that you trust their feedback, that you think it will be helpful. So be selective about who you ask for feedback from. Good. So there's a question that I want to ask. Vladislav wrote, he asked about any useful applications that might be helpful in analyzing sentences, complexity of words, punctuation, etc., which Christina answered when she mentioned Grammarly. But in terms of word complexity, I would just say try to monitor yourself. If you find yourself going to the thesaurus to try to intentionally make your writing sound more impressive, don't do that, basically. Just because as someone who's given a feedback on a lot of admissions essays, I mentioned this last week as well, it's very obvious to me, the reader, when someone has inserted a word that they don't totally understand or that they have never used before to try to make their writing sound more impressive. So it's always very obvious to the reader. Stick to words you know. Don't try to make it sound more academic. And then another way would be to ask for feedback, because if you can give your essay to someone and ask them if anything is unclear, they can identify sentences where they say, I don't understand this, or the meaning here is confusing because the language is not clear to me. So someone else can help you catch that as well.
Nelly, could I please add something?
Yes, please.
I would like to talk about the plagiarism checkers and English language corpus. Do you know anything about those? Do you use anything like that?
Yeah, so I know about plagiarism checkers. We'll talk a little bit about that on Thursday, and I know US universities use those as well.
That might be helpful to Vladislav. And another thing I learned from my university, we were working with English texts as well, and we were working as translators basically. So we had to be sure that this word will match the sentence like 100%. And if you cannot use OSDIC for some reason, I would advise you to use something like British or American language corpus, which means a big site, a big library of all the sentences which can be found online. And you basically type the word and you see the exact sentences where the word was used. Most of them are free. Just type corpus of English language corpus, I guess, in Google, and it will give you some suggestions on those websites, and this is how you can monitor the structure.
Awesome, thank you. I see Pablo is asking how many words our essay should be. Totally depends, and we'll talk about this tomorrow for admissions essays and statements of purpose. But if you're talking about academic writing in colleges, at US colleges, it totally depends. Professors might, I had some professors who would give us a really difficult topic and force us to condense it down to one page. Or sometimes they'll say, write as much as you want. So it just completely depends, but we'll talk about that specifically about admissions essays tomorrow. Irina asks, I don't know if this is the Irina Manjalenko that I know, but if it is, hi, Irina. Will we be able to get the presentation from today? We will not send the presentation itself, but we will send the videos, so you will have access to all of this content. We've been recording the entire session. Can you type that website that you just mentioned, Christina, into the chat box for all panelists and attendees?
Do you see that?
Can you send it to all attendees?
Yeah. It was from me to, okay, panelist. All attendees. Here we go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Valentina, for your kind words. So guys, don't forget about your homework. If you want to do some brainstorming on those topics that are in the chat box, send them to me and via email. And we can either give feedback live tomorrow morning, or if you don't want it to be discussed during the webinar, you can also just send it to me and I'll write you some feedback or thoughts personally. So feel free to send that to me. Thank you all so much. Yes, I will write my email again.
There are two little questions. If we have just 1 minute. So Victoria asked, what's the good beginning for the essay when I should answer to agree or disagree with a statement? Basically, you just put the introduction about the whole topic, and then the thesis statement should uncover your points for and against. So basically, you do not mention any concrete information in your introduction, but you just briefly mention the arguments you will further use in your thesis statement that you will further use in your essay. Okay, and then another one. There was something. Do you think that admission committee will appreciate complex words if used correctly? Well, they probably do if it refers to graduate schools, right, Nelly?
Yeah, as long as the meaning is clear, you know, be honest about your level of English. If you have an advanced level of English, go ahead and use it. Just make sure that you're not confusing the reader. Good. I think that's all the questions. Thank you, Christina, for joining me. Thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you all back tomorrow. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Christina.
Bye-bye, Nelly. Thank you.